week that not everything is in the right order. They are in the right characters according to the colour code, but you may need to go through at some point because I've done quotes from each act for each character. So what you'll find is that for each character there is an opening stage direction that you should learn. Unfortunately, that's not the first card for each character. So go back through and just check, because they've also told me that not all the packs are in the same order, necessarily. Go back through in your own time and just organise them into chronological acts for each character. Right, okay. Something else I want to say before I actually look at some of the quotations with you. You've got quotations for all of the Burling family, so Sheila, Eric, Mr. and Mrs. Burling. You've got quotes for Gerald. You've got quotes for the inspector. And you've got quotes for Eva Smith. And before anybody asks me, no, you've not got quotes for Edna, okay? Because you don't need any. Because that's normally the question we get asked. Listen up. Everybody needs to be settled. Everybody. What I've also done for you is I've actually put some of the words in each quotation in bold, because we do understand that it's asking you a lot to know all of these quotations off by heart on the same day that you've got to know all of the conflict and power poetry quotes. So what I've done, I've put things in bold that are actually the short quotations that you can embed into a response. So I think most of you, on the first card you've got, is the one that Mr. Burling says about cranks. So socialists being cranks, suggesting that, they're lunatics, that they've not got it all up there. So if you need to learn a specific quotation, Vikram, you learn cranks. You don't learn the whole thing. What I'm going to do though today, because I've only got a little bit of time, is I'm going to focus on 3 characters now. I'm going to talk about some of the quotes, so you may wish to make quick notes on the cards if you want to. I'm going to talk about how the quotes are judicious, they're well chosen, because they are good for looking at writers' methods. So if you can turn in your pack, it's the second one in my pack, to this quotation that Mr. Burling says. I bet you all know this quotation. So turn to this. Obviously, if you were going to... There are still people talking. If you were going to use this quotation, you might focus on words like business, himself, etc., whatever. You might be able to remember the whole thing. What I'm interested in talking about is this bit at the bottom, because methods is where a lot of our pupils fall down. Now, a key method in this quotation, which is why it's good to use, is dramatic timing. Because can anybody tell me what happens? You'll notice there's a dash at the end of that quotation. Can anyone tell me what happens at the end of that quotation? Alex?
It gets interrupted because...
I don't know what was funny about that, but... Sorry, Alex, you were saying. This is wasting your own time, not mine. Alex?
It gets interrupted because all he's saying is that you're rich and stuff like that.
What does he get interrupted by? That's the important thing.
Why?
Yeah.
Inspector.
Right. Directly after this scene, write it on the card if you need to. This is an example of dramatic timing, which is a writer's method when you're looking at drama, a dramatic device. Okay? Right after it says and at the end there, you get the stage direction. We hear the sharp ring of a front doorbell. That is the inspector arriving. So write it on there if you need to. So it's dramatic timing. Because just at the height of his boasting, he gets interrupted by the inspector. You could also, therefore, argue that this is a pivotal moment. Now, hopefully you all know what pivotal moments are. They are moments that are significant in the structure of the whole text or play. So obviously it's pivotal because the inspector is there about to burst Mr. Burling's bubble, if you like. I think you could also use this quotation for juxtaposition. And girls at the back, what I would juxtapose this against is when the inspector comes in at the end and he gives his speech about we are members of one body, we are responsible for each other. You've only got to look at the juxtaposition of language of himself against we that the inspector uses. We suggest that the inspector is a socialist, whereas himself suggests that this is a capitalist, someone that's all about himself and his own profit. Okay? Can you go on to the next one, please? Thank you. Right. Next, Mr. Burling quotation, if you can find this one. Again, you probably know this quotation, but it's good for looking at methods. So, Mr. Burling says, I discharged her from my employment nearly 2 years ago. The key word there, if you can't remember the whole thing, is discharged. Now, the method here, and I'm going to talk more about this now, is euphemism. Now, if you're not sure what euphemism is, it's when somebody talks about an unpleasant topic that people don't like to mention in public. So it can be things like sex, death. Here it's getting somebody sacked. But they try and sugarcoat it. They try and make it seem less harsh. So rather than saying, I sacked her, he says, I discharged her, which makes it seem like it was honourable, that he did it with the best intentions. Now, the capitalist characters, Gerald and Mr. Burling and Mrs. Burling in particular, they use euphemism a lot. So we're going to go on to Gerald later, but Gerald says things like, I didn't install her there so that I could make love to her. Now, make love is a euphemism for have sex with her, which is what he ultimately does. Now, listen. So, what you would say here is that the capitalist characters use euphemism to try and hide from the truth. So, rather than admit, Ria, you're constantly talking, rather than admit that they have made mistakes and they've done bad things, they conceal it with the language that they use. So they try and hide it from themselves. So look out for those characters using euphemism, because they do it quite regularly. So again, it's about choosing quotations that are good for looking at methods. Right, going on to the next one. So if you could go on to the next one for me. Another good quotation from Mr. Burling. You have got others in there for it. At the end of the play, so girls, obviously if you get a character question, and you'll always get a choice of 2 questions, you should look at how a character develops or doesn't develop in some cases through Act 1, Act 2 to Act 3. So this quotation is Mr. Burling in Act 3. Now, there's a stage direction, and yes, you can quote stage directions, you should, because it reveals a lot about the characters. The word triumphantly is used, and it's also used to describe Gerald as well. So Gerald and Mr. Burling are quite similar in their views. Triumphantly, if you don't know what it means almost in a celebratory way, that he's celebrating. And what he's celebrating here, Mr. Burling, is that he thinks the inspector wasn't real. So when Gerald makes an inquiry, do you remember, with the police officer, and he says there's no Inspector Gould, that is Mr. Burling's reaction. He celebrates, despite the fact that he's admitted doing something immoral by sacking a girl that didn't deserve it. Now, at the bottom you can see methods there. Obviously triumphantly is an adverb if you wanted to identify it as a language technique. But it's more important that you talk about the use of stage direction, which tells you about the character. I've put on there semantic field. You're only going to know this if you write it down, because I've just listed methods that apply to different bits of the quote. Do you see where he says trick? He says that he has to work a trick on us. Now, trick could be part of a semantic field of language that Mr. Burling and Gerald use to talk about the inspector's visit. And I'll give you these other words now. And Alan Cree, I would write them on there. So the semantic field that Gerald and Mr. Burling use to talk about the inspector's visit, they use trick. They both use the word hoax, H-O-A-X, that means that something is a trick. Mr. Burling calls it a joke. And he also says that it's a lot of moonshine, okay? A lot of moonshine means a lot of rubbish. So if you needed a method with quotes that are easy to remember, you would say that both Gerald and Mr. Burling refer to the inspector's visit as if it was a joke, a trick, a hoax, and a lot of moonshine, proving that they have not taken it seriously whatsoever. They have not learned a lesson. So again, it's about being clever with learning short quotes that are linked to methods. Okay? Sarah, can you go on to the next one for me? Okay, right, the next Mr. Burling quotation that I want to talk about is this one. Again, in Act 3, Mr. Burling says he's convinced that it's a hoax, that's what he's referring to, that there's no police inquiry, no one girl that all this happened to, no scandal. The key word to learn there is